It's the end of the day with Ray. Hello, my friends. Hey, I want to continue on yesterday's video where I was talking about alternative supplies. We're seeing some OEMs having some serious issues delivering, the OEM toner to the resellers so those resellers can put it in their end users' equipment. And I wanted to bring Chris Polek on. We all know Chris Polek of Polek and Polek. Polek and Polek's been an alternative toner supplier to the Document Imaging channel for like 4 or 5 decades. They're good at what they do. They have great relationships with all of the dealers in the community. And Chris, I appreciate you coming on today. Our industries obviously has a lot of crisis thrown at it over these last 18, 20 months. And, toner shortage is now starting to rear its ugly head. And I wanted to just reach out to you and have a conversation about alternative toner products. And I know we've talked about this stuff before, but, I look at some of these dealers and it seems like we're having the same conversation. So I want to clarify that with you. But what's going on in the world of toner right now with the OEMs? Can you give us some insight?
Well, yeah, thank you for inviting me, Ray. And we've seen a number of back order situations with OEMs over this past year. Some not as severe, and then recently you've seen some more severe. I mean, Konica Minolta, for example, is a current one here just because of the situation with their toner factory not being able to operate. That's caused some severe back orders, but everybody has seen about the whole supply chain logistics daily on your news with ships coming in that things are being delayed. So we've seen lots of supply chain disruptions through that. During the month of July, I was actually meeting with dealers at the IBPI regional meeting, and we talked about a lot of these supply chain disruptions. The biggest thorn for dealers at that point was getting the equipment. And when we talked about supplies, they said, supply, we really don't see that as an issue. It's really the machines that are the problem. And as we discussed it, I explained to them, well, part of the reason you should probably take a closer look at us or see some of these other areas where we might be able to help is because when all these machines start arriving in a couple of weeks and they're all going to be set up and go out in the field, what do you think is going to happen with the toner?
Good
now,
point.
they all need toner to go with the machines. Do you think there's a strong possibility that you could see some of the toners for those popular machines that they brought in, that they run into a supply situation because there's all of a sudden a spike in the toner demand?
Well, Chris,
sure enough, we started seeing that, and it's still continuing to go on to some degree.
Well, Chris, I think it was probably over the last 10 years when we really changed the warehousing of products at a dealer level. We used to buy all kinds of crap from the OEMs. They'd call you up at the end of the month and sell you all kinds of stuff. You'd fill your warehouses up. But it has turned more into on demand. And, some of these dealers are keeping, at the most 6-8 weeks, which is probably what they should be doing in an on demand world. But the problem you run into when you have a crisis like we're in front of today. And it just amazes me that we're still having arguments about whether or not an alternative toner is going to be as good as the OEM when as I highlighted yesterday on my video, there's talk out there that Konica is actually looking at alternative manufacturers. And so, here's a question, let's ask the dealers this. If Konica brings you toner as an example, or any OEM brings you toner that is coming from an alternative player, are you going to test it? Are you going to only bring in a couple of bottles when you're in a crisis, or are you going to put it in your machines and run it? And I think, are we still hearing that? Are we still seeing where dealers are afraid of alternative supplies? Especially if I'm a reputable company as you've been doing it for 5 decades. I mean,
there's always some dealers that have some type of fear, and it's really because it's an unknown to them that they haven't used it before. And if an OEM had came to a company like ours or had to fill in an emergency, they're standing behind the product. People would just use it.
Of course they would.
And also, a lot of dealers have a relationship with their OEM is looking to get X amount of business from them, and under the conditions that they have to try and meet these obligations, a lot of time their resistance of using compatible toner is that I couldn't do that because I'd be putting my obligations of numbers that I have to do with the OEM in jeopardy. I can see saving the money, but if I take away enough, then unfortunately, I put at risk this big rebate that I may have at the end of the year. And part of the problem with that is that, I understand that as a fear. However, you'd be surprised that most dealers don't want to take the next step of going through and actually looking at the data, going through the process of evaluating these numbers, and see how much of an opportunity it is. Now, we can help dealers with that process. Most of the time, well, even right now, dealers are extremely busy. The people working for them, they're working with less people. They need to do just as much, if not more. So when you task your people with these type of activities here, they've got so much on their plate. They have to prioritize and see what they can get around to. That project like that may take them weeks and weeks to do. When dealers share information with us, most dealers use eAutomate. It's very easy through the click of a button just to get all your data and your usage together. When you share that with Polek and Polek, we take that data and we help organize it all for you. We do all the work that the people at the dealership are too busy to do. It takes us just a couple of days to organize it, and then we're able to call them a couple of days later and say, hey, we're ready to schedule a meeting and show you the results. And a lot of times when they share with us what they may have gotten as a rebate the previous year, if we went through those numbers here and we couldn't save them more than that rebate, we tell them we're happy to share the data with you of what we came, but there really wouldn't be a reason to meet because we can't help you more than what you're getting from your rebate, so I wouldn't change. But that's pretty rare. Most of the time, we come back with some surprising results as far as how many dollars we can save.
Well, Chris, I almost want to call bullshit on sometimes when they talk about their rebates. They talk about the rebates, but then they don't even know what the rebate is, or they've never looked. I always take the 60% test. If you looked at 60% of your OEM toner and you replace 60% of it, 60%, not 20, not 30, but 60% of it, how much money is that in your pocket? And then what can you do with that money? And then go back and evaluate your rebate. The other thing is, it's not 1970. In 1970, our industry was growing. 1980, even in the 90s, it was growing. But folks, we're in a declining marketplace, and the loyalty has to be at that dealership. We're talking about transitioning. We're talking about the pain of transitioning and moving into other deliverables. And, we can be loyal to our OEMs, but we can't be so loyal to our OEMs that we, destroy our own business in the process. And,
I agree.
We don't even know if this loyal OEM that we're loyal to is even going to be around in 6 months. I would hate to imagine some dealers that have literally spent all this extra money they didn't need to spend for the last 5 or 6 years, and loyal as hell to an OEM, and then all of a sudden, 6 months from now, the OEM doesn't even exist.
Well, yeah, I agree with what you're saying at that point. Under those conditions, that's true. And here's something I think dealers should think about with the rest of the fourth quarter going. As we're talking today, there's only 85 days left in 2021.
It's amazing.
And here's an important number crunching thing to put your people together of looking at is with these targets that you need to hit for this quarter, the upcoming quarter. Let's look about just what you talked about. Declining print already, continues to decline. We've had these major supply disruptions where people aren't getting machines in on time. With all that happening, are you really going to be hitting that number under those conditions? Yeah. If it's so tight to do under normal conditions, when you have equipment that's months behind delivery, I'm having a difficult time understanding how you can hit those numbers that they expected you to do in the first place. Now, maybe it's a conversation that you have to have with your OEM. I know we went through that back in the second quarter of 2020 when COVID first hit, as everything came to a grinding halt. And there were a lot of OEMs that, relaxed or readjusted numbers here. So I don't know if OEMs are going to consider doing that now, but if they're not making adjustments for it, how are you going to be able to hit those numbers to get your rebate anyway? So you might have your loyalty, and as you say, 6 months later, if they can't change the target numbers, guess what? The rebate is going to be zero.
Well, I don't think we see some of these OEMs are barely making any money as it is, and on top of that, they've added some crises to that. So the numbers for the OEMs are their second quarter. Would have ended in September. So I'm curious to see where they're going to be. They'll probably publish them in November. But it's just the reality of it is the dealers have to really look at their own business model, and of course you have your loyalties and you have your relationships with your OEMs. And I'm not saying go bastardize all your relationships with OEMs. That's not what this is about. It's about transitioning your business and survival in an industry that's on a massive decline, and you have to have alternatives and you have to understand them. If dealers knew what a 60% switch would be from OEM to alternatives, whether they went all the way to 60% or not, it would give them a number that would blow their mind. It would give them a number, especially some of these bigger dealers, that would say, "Oh my God! That would just that could fund 6 months of my IT transition," as an example. And so I did a video one time and talked about how you're like the vault. Dealers can walk in this vault, just take money out of it if they just switch from old habits and change them into different habits.
Yeah, I mean, when you look at that, when you look at that, this is money that you're saving as a dealership, and you're keeping it in your own bank account instead of putting it in someone else's. And especially when it's time when there's stress on sales revenues, when they're declining or flat, whether it's just because of less demand out there or supply disruptions that we're seeing now. We just can't get the sales up because we don't have the equipment to supply and meet the demand. When you're able to save these dollars over your regular purchases here, you put it in your bank account. It's more profit, which would be the same as increasing your revenues.
Absolutely.
When you have more profit. And actually, I have a very easy chart that I would be happy to email to anyone. You can put my email address in your show notes for it, and people can email me. And you can put in the subject line profit chart. And it's a very simple chart, but as long as you know your net profit of your business, you can look in the column for the net profit that you're in. You can anything that you're looking at, whether you're buying toner or I don't care if you're saving on cell phone bills or insurance rates, anything else that you negotiate, but you look at the dollar amount that you save each year and you go to where your profitability is here, that extra profit will tell you what that would have been in the equivalent in sales revenue for what you saved. So cool. if that's an important thing for you to understand, email me. I'll be happy to give that chart to you. We've also found, or dealers, the owners have found that this is a very easy thing to do, because when they talk about making these changes, whether it's using compatible toner or any other change that's going to help reduce their expenses, they're able to use this chart and explain why. Because if sales are flat or sales are down, they say if we save this money, this would be about the same as us making up for that revenue that we lost.
Good. It's a good point. I want everybody to do the 60% challenge. So here's my question to you. I'm a multi-line dealer. Let's say I have 5 or 6 different brands. I get you my data from eAutomate. We work together. You go in there. You could show me all the brands that I'm dealing with, all the toner that you manufacture that you could replace that, and then give me the number at 60%. How long would that take you to do that?
Usually, I'd say at most it takes 2 business days for us to turn around and get that to you.
Now, I would suggest this: don't bombard my good friend Chris Polek just for just nonsense. If you're really serious about it, but I think every dealer out there should be looking at that 60% number, And it's a big number, 60%. A lot of you're thinking, well, we can't replace all our OEM toners, 60% of our OEM toner. But if you knew what the number was, quite honestly, if you knew what the number was and you decided to do it and everything worked out, you'd probably move up to 80 or 90%. I know the OEMs don't want to hear that, but at the end of the day, the dealers have to take care of their business. It's their business, you know. And the OEMs have to work with these dealers, and times are changing. Relationships are going to change and be stressed like never before because we are in a declining marketplace. Chris, is there anything you want to add before we end this?
Yeah, I mean, I would just to tack on to what you were saying there, I would add on in these times here that independent dealers need choices, an alternative to make sure that their business is surviving. So the important thing is to at least know the numbers. You can, you know, deciding not to change is also a choice. But the biggest disservice you can do yourself is you know, that information that you don't realize that you don't know. And when dealers go through this process with us, we hear that a lot after that, is that we didn't realize that there was this much additional profit that could go to our bottom line.
You know what, Chris? I always say that status quo, basically I say status quo sucks, but in all reality, unawareness is what keeps you in status quo most of the time. It's unawareness that's really crippling, you know, especially in a declining marketplace. Because, Chris, everybody knows that status quo is in fact the killer of all that'll be invented. Don't get stuck in status quo, and I'll see y'all tomorrow.
See everyone.